Hey everyone, Tactics here, and in honor of it being a tyrannical week, I figured it would be a good time to go over some of the hardest dungeon bosses in Season 3 of Dragonflight and how I recommend you handle them. I've been talking to a lot of different players both over in my Discord channel and over on my Twitch stream as well, and I've picked 5 bosses here that I get the most questions about, and we're going to go over them in this video. But if you are having issues with the boss that I did not cover in this video, let me know down in the comments below and maybe we can throw together a part 2. I'm also going to be posting a video going over the hardest trash pulls in season 3, so let me know what you'd like to see in that video. Otherwise, let's start out with the final boss here of Ataldazar, Yazma. Now, this boss is a pretty heavy movement boss here. I'm just going to play the clip and kind of talk you through it. So initially, I think one of the better things is probably to actually bait into the cubby first, because what's going to happen here is the very first soul rend overlaps with the spider spawn, the very first spider spawn. So by putting it in the cubby, as opposed to what a lot of people do in the middle of the room here, which we're going to see us do, it gives you a bit more time to bait with the spiders. And that's actually something we can improve on. In this entire clip, I don't believe we really use the cubby at all. So don't forget to use the cubby. But you're going to see here, basically, the goal is to stay as grouped as possible. So, of course, whenever the soul rend comes out, they go, they kill these mobs, and then they come back, and we're going to be kiting around the room together. And you can see these spawns, like I mentioned. This initial spawn is not great. It would have been better if we had baited it into the cubby initially for the first spawn, as opposed to this. But you're going to see, because we stay together, excuse me, these spiders are going to group up nicely. We're just going to have to dodge along the wall here. And something else about the spiders, when they're small, they just kind of pace around in a small circle. When they're big, they're actually fixated onto a random player. So you can actually use that to your advantage. For example, if you see a spider kind of walking past you, you know when it's big, it's not going to switch targets to you. So you can kind of stay still a little bit here and let it walk near you without worrying that it's going to randomly turn and hit you. So something to keep in mind, they are fixating while they're big. But you see here, we're just kind of sliding along the edge of the room here, and you see how grouped up these spiders have actually become, which is pretty nice. Now, the scariest thing you're going to want to deal with is during the overlap of the soul rend and the racking pain. Of course, that racking pain is no longer interruptible, so whoever is targeted by it during one of those overlaps, that's the best time to defensive. Now, one other thing to talk about here is immune clears. So immune clears are both good and bad depending on how you play around them. So you don't need immune clears whatsoever. You saw the spiders here were relatively clear, and we could have continued along this kite path for a very long time without them really becoming a problem. You could continue doing that around the whole room. What clearing spiders does is it drastically reduces the amount of movement you need to do, because again, I cleared shortly after a spider spawn. So you have about now 20 plus seconds where you can just chill. And so depending on your comp, if you want to be able to stand still for, 20 seconds at a time, this can be useful, assuming you have a decent number of immunities to clear them. Obviously, a prop paladin can kind of solo this by themselves, rotating through bubble and spell warding, and I am playing a prop paladin in this video. You do not need to do these clears, but these clears can make it a bit easier for your movement. They take 2 minutes to expire, so what you need to actually do to make sure you don't run out of space is you need to make sure either the boss is going to die before you come back to this space, or it's going to take you 2 minutes to do a rotation before you get back to that space. So that's kind of your two options here. And you'll see it kind of runs out as we get over to that area, and we, again, don't use the cubby here. And you can see we're just keep moving as these spider spawns stay together, keep moving, and bait these soul rends away from the group here. He cloaks, that's a good use of cloak too. He cloaked the racking pain cast, and with his cloak, he just clears a few more spiders. So again, this allows us to plant again for a decent amount of time. Again, another 15 seconds before we're gonna have to deal with more spiders there. So by chaining these immunities, you can kind of delay it. But again, he used the immunity as a defensive first and foremost. He didn't specifically use it to clear the spiders, so be aware of that. It's much better to use those defensively for the racking pains, especially as you get into higher and higher tyrannical keys. And like I said, make sure you are rotating through into this cubby for the actual like the boss to conserve space, because again, it's just free space. If you ignore this cubby, you're ignoring part of the boss room, right? So rotate into here. Unlike us, we did not do that, and you can see again we're getting to plant for a bit. We're baiting the spiders, and we're just going to keep moving, etc., around the room as they spawn. And like I mentioned, you'd just be rotating heavier if you didn't have immunities for these spiders over here, because you'd have a trail of 10 more, 15 more spiders than we currently have. So just you'd move more, and just always pre-moving away from these spiders, but generally staying as a group to bait them together for the fixates, right? Because you see here, as we separate a little bit, one of these spiders got a bit further than the rest. And as a tank player, if you're popping a defensive at any point, you can do a single spider soak, not a problem. And that's not really too much of an issue, especially if there's like one individual spider kind of blocking you and your party. So that's something you can do as a tank. But overall, it's a very, very heavy movement fight, and that is Yazma. Next, let's move into everyone's favorite dungeon, Murozond's Rise. We're going to talk about Morchie and the final boss as well, Chrono-Lord Deios here. So Morchie, of course, face boss away for that frontal. The big thing is kind of about how you handle the actual dudes you get here, what they call the familiar faces. That's what they're called. There's heavy CC strats because they don't obey PvP duration CC anymore. So if you have those in your group, you can do that. We don't have a ton of those, right? We have the CC roots from the dragon, but that's on a longer cooldown, so we don't have a ton outside of that. So we have to not use that hard CC strategy. So we'll go through that in a second here. First, more problems is relatively straightforward. Of course, you're looking for the Morchie without a hat. Ping system is great here, of course. Just ping the one without the hat, and you know, it's a lot easier, especially in pug groups. Spread the ping out. If you are going to miss this, like you're not going to get here in time, start running towards the edge of the room, not directly at the Morchie. I think it happens on the next one for us. I'll fast forward just a tiny bit here. When she jumps away here in 20 seconds, I almost don't make it, and you're going to see I start running towards the edge of the room, and I actually end up avoiding the frontal cone here. So she teleports away. They find her. Where is it? I'm not going to make it here. It's on square. So I run to the edge of the room. Boom, look at that cone, right? So if you're running down the middle of the room here, and it's at square, you're trying to run straight to square, you're going to get hit. So I run towards the edge of the room, and you don't need to get as close to the boss. That's a safe area. So that's a tip for if you're not going to make it, you're very far away. Now let's talk about the familiar faces here. Go back a little bit. So one of the strategies, again, is to group together, drop them all off, and use AoE CC and chain AoE CCs on them to keep them locked down. Noting again that when this familiar face is cast again, they'll break their CC, I believe. We don't have those, so what we just do is we just try and coat these guys. Now, one thing you want to try and avoid is staggering this debuff too high. You can actually heal through a 4-stack, a 5-stack, fine. What you're going to run into problems with is you chain, hey, we got 3 stacks. Right at the end, we chain it to a 4-stack. Right at the end, we chain it to a 5-stack, right? That's when your healer's going to struggle. Getting this to a 4-stack very quickly is not a big deal. You can heal through that fine. And you notice here, I'm going to just hold my guy. I hodge him. And then I'm going to go prep for him to get eaten by this puddle here. And then that will be just a single stack. So very, very easy to deal with. Another thing to kind of do is potentially pre-position yourself such that your familiar face will just walk straight towards you and hit a trap, right? See, they're on the field here. They will always respawn where they were CC'd, whether they're in a roots or a stun or whatever, or they're in one of the traps here. My guy was right here. He's always going to spawn there on the next familiar faces cast, so you can use that to your advantage and pre-position after this more problems cast, such that there's, excuse me, a trap between you and your guy. So that's something you can do as well. Other note on CDs, don't lust on pull. Don't use big CDs on pull, because like 10 seconds into the pull, she casts more problems. So as soon as you find the more problems Chromie, that's when you bloodlust and pop your CDs, because that Chromie does take damage even when you're hitting her in that phase. So that damage is all real damage. So again, it's all about really managing these guys, not taking too many hits from their AoE around them. And you see there, boom, we did two guys are CC'd. I'm just kind of tanking my guy. It's not a big deal. And then that way we're not staggering, chaining our debuff rather. So that's how I recommend handling Morchie. Let's go to Chrono-Lord Deios here at the end of the dungeon. Yeah, there we go. All right, Chrono-Lord Deios. So this fight, there's basically the huge damage from incoming on the tank, and then there's juggling the infinity orb. So that's the two kind of things you need to balance for this boss fight. Starting with the infinity orbs, basically, it's easiest if you have two players to juggle them, two range players rather, or one range player or two range players. And the reason for that is because they will prioritize targeting range players. So you can see here, we have three range players, so they're going to make it a bit confusing. There's not necessarily one range player that's always going to get the orbs, so we have to assign a specific person to do it. If you only had one or two range players in your group, you could say, hey, say, for example, we didn't have the priest healer. It was like a monk, for example. Then we know both the dragon and the mage are always going to get targeted. We can say, dragon, you always stay into your orb. Mage, always get out. Easy. Similarly, if we only had one range, you know, hey, you always stay in it. The melee or whoever else is targeted, always get out. Because we have three, we instead assign person to always stay in it or get in it in the dragon, and then the dragon, once they're in it, the other person can get out. So even if it doesn't target the dragon, he's going to run into an orb and stay in an orb to make sure that he's soaking it. So that's what our strategy is with more than two ranged players. But again, easier if you have one or two, but that's how we handle it. So you see the dragon's already in it. Other guy gets out, and then he just kind of stays in it until our debuff is gone, then gets out of it himself. And he just does that the whole fight. Now, tank damage. Let's talk about tank damage. So the breath, nasty initial hit, nasty dot. The real scary part is here when you're overlapped with a keeper alive and you have the dot from the breath. That is the scariest part because, of course, this keeper just spams infinite blast into the tank. Spamming infinite blast, there's a cone hit, there's the cone dot, now it's dead. So now we're kind of chilling a little bit here, not as scary. Those are always the biggest points of defensiveness you need in this fight. So whether you have your own personal CDs or externals to call for, that's when you need them. This is the scariest part here for the boss, the initial part here. You have a full breath and a keeper's definitely alive. And then you're going to be dealing with a double keeper just after this. So this is kind of the scary cadence of the fight. Here you see as a paladin, I used Sentinel, I used Guardian of the Ancient Kings through those moments to kind of get me through them. I still have Bubble up as well, so that's kind of what you need to make sure you're managing. Call for externals if you need them here, and you're going to see also we are going to Bloodlust this part with the double keeper. You take a tank cone right before as they're running, and then you need to run over here and pick up these guys while you have this dot on you, and they're going to start obviously putting out magic debuffs and then spamming their aggro target. So as a tank, you want to get aggro on these guys so they don't infinite blast your allies. But we lusted here just because, again, scary part of the fight. Externals on the tank here. I got pain suppression, as you saw as well. Want to kill these guys as quickly as possible, and then that will transition us into the actual boss phase, where, of course, you see here range are hitting the boss from here as well, so it's not fully wasted if you have range in your group. For this transition, you see we're stacking up and rotating around the room, and we're going to rotate around this room in a clockwise direction, as you see here. Tank always facing the boss towards the edge for this breath, and as I mentioned, this is less scary because it's just the breath damage you have to deal with, but as long as you have something to cover it, that's really all you need to worry about here. So you see I have Sentinel, and we're kind of chilling there, even though we're a little bit low health. There we go, I can talk. And then just rotating around the room here. Again, orbs are still being managed by our evoker always getting in, and you have to consistently manage those throughout this phase as well. And also note, you do get damage buffs in this phase from the dragon aspect, so keep that in mind for cooldown usage potentially as well. Maybe you don't want to Bloodlust the two adds there because damage-wise, it's not a great Bloodlust. So if you're trying to conserve the most time, it may not be the best, but it definitely is, I think, the safest Bloodlust to do just for additional healing, additional help on the tank, and additional damage to actually kill those double adds before they get out of hand. So that's how I recommend handling Chrono-Lord Deios. Very, very scary boss fight. Maybe the scariest boss fight so far in Season 3 for sure. Just a lot going on with it. Anyways, though, let's move on to another pretty heavy tank damage fight in the Soulbound Goliath. Now, the goal here on this boss fight is to actually clear the boss by touching him into fire as few times as possible. Obviously, if you're able to, maybe on fortified weeks, you can do a 0 clear boss fight. But as you push into higher keys, as you do tyrannical stuff, that's not going to be as feasible, right? So currently, I think the 28 World First 28 that was done with 2 clears. So they cleared the boss in the fire twice throughout the whole fight. So that kind of gives you an idea. You want to be clearing somewhere between 0 and 2 times is the ideal number of clears. And that's because The fire damage, the burning brush, does so much damage to the raid. You need to be able to stack up your raid CDs to actually live it. And the important thing is to actually make sure that you are pre-using those CDs as you go to clear, because the damage does kind of scale, it appears to scale rather, with the number of stacks that the boss has of Soul Harvest. This is a damage amp, of course, and so not only does it increase the auto attack damage, the crush damage on the tank, but it does seem to increase the burning brush damage as well. So you want to make sure all those defensive CDs are pre-running for those initial ticks, as it does decay over the duration of burning brush. So the later ticks are actually significantly less scary than the early ticks. So make sure you are pre-defensiving here. I think we're going to clear in a second. Yeah, so we're going to clear here, and you see here as we're going, boom, rallies out, Zephyr's out, cloak immediately for the first few ticks, just to make sure we survive those. That's what we're worried about. The later ticks, not so much. Make sure the first ticks are covered. That's the biggest thing for the burning brush. In terms of soul thorns stuff, so certain clears do work on them still. Shapeshifting was changed, so you cannot pre-shapeshift it as a shaman or a druid, unfortunately, but other things do work. So you've got things like any momentary immunity, so like Evoker, Deep Breath, Meta Leap, things like that. You can immune the stun. Other things like the Mage Ice Flow blinks. Did he just get it there? He might have gotten it there. Yeah, he has Ice Flows. He can blink out of it. That's interesting. Obviously, Paladins can bop people out of it as well. So those kinds of things can make life easier to instantly break Soul Thorns, but obviously you're still going to have to hard swap to them. Luckily, Soul Thorns does not scale with his damage amp either. I think it's considered another mob instead of getting source from the Goliath himself, so it's not getting this damage amp on him. So the Thorns always seem to hit for about the same amount of damage, so there's no need to excessively defensive them later on in the boss fight. Just distribute your your defensives accordingly throughout the entire encounter there. And as a tank, again, just making sure this boss will ramp up. So once you get towards your clear count, you're going to be taking the most damage. So don't pop your defensives too early. Kind of pop them according to when you plan to clear. That is Soulbound Goliath, though. We have just one more boss left to cover, and that is the third boss of the Everbloom, Archmage Sol. Now, this is another kind of positioning fight, but the positioning here is much more static. So you're going to see, basically, we're going to play, if you divide the room into 4 squares, right, the 4 corners, here's top left, here's top right, bottom left, based on my current orientation. We're going to play in the bottom right, and we're going to have our baiter playing in the top left. As long as you're diagonal, that's all that matters. But you want to play diagonally from the person baiting the arcane, the spatial compressions here. Because that's going to be the thing that gets a lot of people. You get spatialed into a fire swirl, you get spatialed into an ice, and you're frozen and you die. That's what you want to avoid. So we bait diagonally, and that gives you 2 avenues, either to this one directly to our left on the screen or straight in front of us, depending on which one is safer to dodge into. And you can easily dodge into that quadrant. Then you get pulled not into any other mechanic, assuming you bait correctly. So let's go through this here. The phases always come in the same order. It's always fire right off the top alone, then it's fire and ice, and then it's ice and arcane, and then it's arcane and fire, and then it repeats again. So it's always going to repeat in the same order. Baiting isn't super necessary, obviously, for this first one. Just something that, he's going to stay out there the whole fight. One thing to note is that in terms of personal usage, the scariest part is certainly during any fire phase, because this fire damage that goes out is random target damage. So, it deals obviously the most damage out of any other ability in this phase going out, or in this boss fight rather. So this is where you would spend any personals if you were worried about your health pool. Now, see here, basically, ice is going out, very simple. We're just going to step back, dodge it. Our baiter does die here, so we have another person go out to bait. Okay, so here is the first arcane phase. And basically, the goal here is to bait far enough that the arcane always triggers after the other mechanic has been dodged. So he didn't quite get too far enough away, I think. You can see here, we're just dodging into one of our quadrants. Boom, we get pulled. Actually, that was perfectly fine. We dodge the ice, and because we were already a little bit high up here, we dodge up into this quadrant. We get pulled, and you notice we cannot get pulled possibly far enough to touch his ice. So that is the goal every single time. We're going to reset here our positions, make sure we're diagonal from each other, and the same thing is going to happen here. You just watch the fire swirlies, and you make sure you don't get pulled into the fire swirlies. You know you're always going to get pulled in this direction here. We got lucky. Yeah, we never have to move here with these spawns. And you see how late this pull is? That's the goal every time. So yeah, the previous one was a little quicker than we wanted, but still, like, the bait is always quite long, assuming you do it correctly. So we can fast forward here to the next one. Again, another Arcane and Ice, and kind of give you an idea. So there's the Arcane Orb going out. We can easily dodge into this quadrant, and we know we're getting pulled in this direction. Like, look, we're not going to possibly get pulled here. The only person that is in a problematic spot is, of course, the person baiting. You see here, he got pulled in a little bit. Couldn't quite get far enough away, but he ice blocked and he's good. So they need to be careful. But everyone else, you should have plenty of time based on how far the baiter is, that you can dodge the mechanic or pre-position here for the fire one. Again, we got lucky, nothing in the way. Get pulled, and the mechanic is already done for. So you're only worried about getting pulled and nothing really to get pulled into. So that's kind of the goal for Archmage Sol here. It makes it a lot easier for sure if you have that one person out and then everyone else. It just kind of stacked together to make sure that healing is relatively easy. And again, only the one player is potentially in danger out there. But there we have it, guys. 5 of the hardest bosses in Season 3 of Dragonflight and my recommended strategies. Hopefully this video does help you guys out, and if it did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more content like it, including a video, like I mentioned, going over the hardest trash pulls of the season, as well as in-depth route walkthroughs for 0.1% title level keys if you're interested in seeing some more advanced strategies throughout an entire dungeon. If I didn't cover a boss that you are struggling with, let me know down in the comments below, and if there's enough of them, maybe we can make a second part of this video. As always, I need to give a big shout out to all of my Patreon supporters, as well as to everyone here watching right now. It really does mean a lot to me, so thank you, and I'll see you all in the next video.